we turn your passion, but also personality into content that works not just for them, but also for you too? Because I'm sure what we've all been learning that the key to content is making it be sustainable and consistent, and that takes a lot of time and energy. So hopefully by the end of the session, we'll have at least some principles to make that tension a little bit less, so that we can create content more consistently. But before we get started with that, I wanted to quickly walk you through kind of my origin story and how I got into content media strategy, but also content creation as well. And so, like I just shared, I grew up overseas my whole life. I grew up in the most Muslim part of Russia and in a deeply historic city. When I was in high school, my city, my hometown, celebrated our 1000th birthday. And which is funny. And here in the United States, we're celebrating 250 years, but there was 1,000 when I was in high school. And my parents always kind of told us to kind of go out and explore all the time. So no matter where I lived throughout the world, I always wanted to engage it and explore. And that's kind of how I got into the content that I create now. So I grew up in Muslim Russia. To learn English, I went to a Canadian boarding school in Germany, in Southwest Germany, on the border of France and Switzerland, and then came to the United States for university. And then after I graduated, moved to Washington, D.C., where I have called home for almost two decades now. And I started out my career, this is going to date me, but I'm generation one in terms of social media managers. So a lot of the major social media platforms that exist today, the big ones, were created when I was at university. And so when I entered the workforce, simply because I was the youngest person on staff, they asked me to start social media for each company that I worked for. And so I started out my career working for what's become the largest human rights organization that fights human trafficking. It's called International Justice Mission. And I started both social media for them as well as influencer marketing. So anyone with a platform that was passionate about their work, I would manage that relationship. And there was a lot of overlap between social media and influencer marketing. And then wanted to go into corporate America, and I joined Coca-Cola Company to lead social media and influencer marketing again, but for all of Coca-Cola's feel-good brands is what we called it. So that was the organic brands, the fair trade brands, and that really accelerated my learning because one, Coca-Cola has a bigger budget than a human rights organization. And I was able to kind of just learn a lot about social media and go deeper into that, especially the strategy side. And then from there, moved over to the Washington Post, where I led a social media and digital marketing team and became a journalist. And so I helped start the travel section of the Washington Post and still write for the Washington Post today. And so my entire career, I was on the brand side when it came to content creation, in terms of actually leading a team that we would create our content in-house, post it, manage it, just ourselves. But then I would also work with content creators that we would hire to have an influencer marketing program with. And so it was fun to be on that side. So I knew from a brand perspective how to negotiate contracts, how to help with creating authentic content in partnership with a content creator and influencer. And then once I was at the Washington Post, I always explored wherever I lived, but I got into photography, and Instagram was just growing rapidly and started to share every time I explored online. And then once I became a father, I did that with my daughter. And especially during COVID, I taught her the alphabet by exploring every neighborhood in Washington, D.C. And that I would share what I would find on Instagram specifically. And just like not overnight, but over a period of a year, thousands of people started to follow our adventures. I would actually vote in what neighborhood they wanted us to explore next. And that resulted in us creating the first ever guide to every single neighborhood in Washington, D.C., which there are over 136 neighborhoods, and just haven't stopped since then. So because of that and helping to co-found the top influencer group here in Washington, D.C. called IGDC, now I get to be still on both sides, where I still work with a lot of brands in terms of creating influencer marketing programs and content, but also be a content creator myself, where brands will reach out to me and invite me to partner with them. So it's really fun to wear both those hats, and both sides I can apply the learnings to the other side. So again, so that's where I just haven't stopped trying to post on all social media, but specifically for me, Instagram. And my why is to really spark curiosity about where we live from not only Washington, D.C., but throughout the world. So, being a travel journalist, every time I travel, I try to kind of go beyond the tourist sites and try to interview people, go into the neighborhoods, find local mom and pop shops and public art and these, for lack of better phrase, hidden gems throughout wherever we travel to and here in Washington, D.C. And so I have a lot of different content structured around that, but everything has to map to that. And so it's all about sparking that curiosity so that people go beyond the neighborhoods in which they live and to really understand the city of DC or whatever city they find themselves in a more holistic way. And so how I've done that, so when I first started posting, it was really centered around this ABC tour I did with my daughter. But as we've kind of evolved, my daughter's now 9, she's in school, she graduates from the 3rd grade tomorrow. But now I've kind of created a number of series that map back to my why. So the first is doing these DC neighborhoods because I get so many new followers each month that I always want to, and there's in DC, like many cities, things change constantly. And so every day I go out and explore a different part of the city and revisit all these neighborhoods and just share the history, current context, and what they can do and how they can engage it respectfully. And so for the DC neighborhoods, I've evolved that to it's mainly an Instagram story series. And it looks something like this, where I will take on Instagram story only, I will introduce the neighborhood and then kind of at a high level, kind of go through how they might know this neighborhood and a little bit of history from this neighborhood. And then it just kind of builds on each other. And because it is a way that I tell stories, these get thousands and thousands of views every time I do it because people will send it to their friends saying, "Hey, like Austin's in your neighborhood. Did you know this about it? Or what did he miss? What should he add?" And it's a really fun series. And so I usually also turn this series into a reel or a carousel post, but the main vehicle is through Instagram story. So what can we learn from that specific series? So one, I'm trying to diversify the content venue. And so it's not just about reels, it's not just about carousel posts. I actually build it specifically for Instagram story, which has become kind of a more underappreciated part of Instagram, but still a powerful tool, especially because you can include links that go outside of Instagram. So I'll often link to news articles that do an even deeper dive into these neighborhoods. I have a website where I go into deeper stories, and so I can constantly drive there through Instagram story. And then I lean on photography. I still believe, again, this will date me, but Instagram was first started as a photography platform. And so a lot of my friends are still salty about Reels being introduced and how Reels have taken over Instagram. But I still want to lean into the fact that it was started with really good photos. And being a photographer, I want to try to take photos that will just make you stop and think. And that's very much part of the strategy behind that content series. And then I always use text on the videos as well and photos. So as I build the story, I always put that text. And I have my own brand. And part of it is I always use lowercase letters, even at the beginning of sentences and and for titles and all of that. And so it kind of gives it a more distinct kind of look and feel. So people can right away recognize, even before they see my profile picture, like, oh, this is Austin. That's his style. This is part of his series that I've already followed and enjoy. And then four, I focus on the niche history. And so there are a lot of perspectives. And one of them is that the more narrow the audience, the better. And I live in a city of DC, which is one of the most educated cities in the United States. Most people have a master's degree here, and people just really, we're a city of nerds. And so people love to learn, and they love to learn about where they live. And so people really do enjoy following this otherwise boring series about the history of where they live. Next is obscure DC, and I'm hoping this video will work, but I wanted to at least walk you through a very short reel. Did that work? Perfect. And so for this, so I do reels quite often as well. And I always try to keep them short, but this one is actually near my house. And I try to, again, not highlight what people can find in the National Mall unless there's something really interesting about it. Like on the Lincoln Memorial, for example, there's a misspelling in the original etching on one of the walls. I would highlight that, but I try to find more hyper local places like this that are more obscure. And so what we can learn from this is I optimize Reels because Reels have a higher chance of getting on the Explore page and they're more shareable, especially when it comes to view count. But I always try to keep it very short for these Reels just because people have a short attention span. Sometimes longer Reels can get a lot of traction, but the shorter, the better. And then I use really,
What do you consider short to long? Just as a what's the
yep.
ratio?
Yeah. Yeah. So long, I would say, is anything over 30 seconds. And anything under 30 seconds is short. And so for this one, I think it was just like it was under 20 seconds, I believe. And so to that end, and I learned this at the Washington Post because I do a lot of videos for the travel vertical of the Washington Post. And my editor would always say, he's like, it will feel rushed when you're doing it, but it won't sound or feel rushed for the user because people are so used to this now. But he would always encourage me to do really quick clips of the video. And even at the times where I do narration, try to speed it up, try to be quick about it and not have as many pauses just because you want the video as short as possible. And then it was helpful being at the Post because we're constantly editing. Like, is every word necessary? Is every clip absolutely necessary? And which means you have to end up cutting things out that you're married to that you really like. And so I use really quick shots. And so I rarely do a clip within a reel that's over 2 seconds. So most of my clips are between 0.8 to 1.2 seconds. And which seems very quick, but for social media, it doesn't. It goes slower than it sounds like, and that's really so I can keep my reels very short. And so the reel I just showed you um, has quite a lot of views because it was so shareable because people watched it to the end, and so the algorithm saw that as an engaging piece of content and shared it to even more people that don't follow me. And then three, I focus on the city of DC and not me. And so I don't often appear in my content. The one exception is if I'm working with a client or with a partner where they want me to. So I actually will show you the next example. You'll actually see my face for like a 1 second clip, and I do narration. But for most of my content, because I want it to be about the city and I don't want people to be distracted by my face or my voice, I just keep it as exactly just like you saw, where I don't appear in it at all. There's still people in it, but they're more from a distance. You can't really recognize them to respect them. And there's always music that it ties into the theme of that reel. So that particular song that I did is a go-go song, which go-go was born out of DC. It's our official music in Washington, DC. And it's from someone who grew up in the neighborhood that where that skating park is. And I just put text on there. So this is the one exception where you will see my face, but this is a content series I did in partnership with the Washington Post, where they asked me to go into the city during the holiday season, so the month of December and January, and try to find holiday themed, unique, hyper local spots. And they asked that I show my face in each reel just briefly, and they asked if I would do narration. So I will walk you through this is a 4-part series.
Dogs, bells, and sloths are just a few things you'll find painted on giant holiday cards in Delray in Alexandria, Virginia. My name's Austin Graff, and I'm partnered with WP Creator to uncover the holiday-inspired fun in the DC area. For the final episode of District Unwrapped, I'm along East Luray Avenue in Alexandria, where one neighbor started a beloved holiday tradition. Rebecca wanted to recreate the holidays in her hometown in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So she painted a giant plyboard, turning it into a holiday card display in her yard. Now many of her neighbors follow suit, creating a memorable, hyper-local holiday experience for everyone. The cards even pour into other streets. My daughter's favorite is a giant card inspired by the movie Elf. If you go turn a day into it, grab coffee from the DC area's oldest coffee roastery, Swings. Order all-day breakfast at beloved Matt and Tony's. Read poetry along a Delray neighbor's fence on the corner of East Windsor and DeWitt Avenues. Finish with frozen custard from the Dairy Godmother. Thanks for following along District Unwrapped. Here's to always exploring the DC area.
I love it because I'm not often in my videos. I hate watching that video because I'm not often in it. But so what we can learn from this is this does test longer reels. And so each of those reels I did with the Washington Post and WP Creator was just over a minute long, but always under a minute and 30 seconds. And we added captions and narration as well. So sometimes narration is helpful, but because a lot of people watch videos online with the sound off or turned down, that adding captions makes it more accessible. And then 3, to tell a story. And so kind of tell the unique story behind Holiday Card Lane, and then some recommendations of what to do. And they wanted me to personalize it. So I called out my daughter's favorite because we go every year. One of our best friends lives on that block. And then uses limited self-focus shots. And so again, I tried to, even though they wanted me to be in it a few times, I kept it. There's only 2 clips where I appear, but the rest really is about Holiday Card Lane. And so based on all that, there's a few kind of principles I try to use for content creation. And some of this will look familiar based on the work you've been doing the last few weeks. But one, of course, is knowing your why. And because again, I always see like your presence online it's a representation of a part of who you are. Obviously, it's not your entire self, but it's helpful to kind of be consistent and to let people know, set expectations up front. And so you let people know why they should follow you, and creating consistent content is helpful in that. But all that content should ladder to your why. And so it doesn't feel kind of off brand for you. And so now that I'm in this content creation world as a person, I get pitched quite often every day. And I have a very strong perspective on what sponsored posts that I will do, that it has to fit to my authentic life. And I'll never push a product or never push like a particular business. And so to that end, since I'm all about exploring, especially DC, I might partner with a neighborhood association or a tourism bureau. I was in Philadelphia this past weekend, went to visit Philly, a city I go to quite often on my own and know quite well. And the post I did for them was they just paid for me to come up, and they just said, explore on your own for a weekend, which I did. I went to the restaurants I wanted, the neighborhoods I wanted to go, and then created a reel of just me exploring. So it's that authentic fit of, okay, how do you spark curiosity around place, in that case, Philadelphia? And so it would be so disconnected for people if all of a sudden I did a reel about the type of the burst toothbrush that I use every morning and night. That would be such a disconnect because it does not at all ladder to me trying to spark curiosity around place and the places which we live, that over time, people would just get confused and disengage and might eventually unfollow me because of that. And then 2, research others. So like once you know your why, and again, this is a lot of the work that you've done, but kind of do the work to see what else is out there. And so in my space, there are a number of people in DC that also cover very local places. And so I wanted to see, okay, what is there a place for me to be different, which ladders to the number 3, and how can I like even partner with them and kind of build community with them, learn from them, but also what's different that each of us can offer to give a reason why people should follow all of our accounts. And so for me, no one is telling neighborhood stories from a historical context and by exploring by foot. I like to run, so I'm often running through these places. And I literally go to every street and alley in each neighborhood, go to every business, talk to all the groups so it's like weeks of research, but no one else is doing that. And so it gives incentive why people should follow along this series as well as me. And then 4, create a unique brand and voice. So I alluded to this before, but one example of that is I don't often appear in the content that I post. It keeps the city as a main focus or a neighborhood as a main focus. And I always use text on video or photos, and they're always lowercase. And then I have a certain way that I shoot that people can start to recognize, oh, that photo or that clip in a reel looks like Austin Graff, because I like kind of like the slow movement, kind of around corners. I try to find different unique vantage points. I want to make sure the lighting is fine. And so I've created this unique brand and voice for each piece of content I put out. And 5, learn some skills. So I do think that, and this is, in my opinion, this is specific to Instagram, but I do think it can apply to other platforms. But I do think it is helpful to learn some skills around creating just really good content. So if your focus, your plan is to focus on just photography, or maybe text graphics for Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn, for example, make sure that you just learn how to do that really well so that it pops and that it will keep people's attention. Authenticity is still king online, but if it's not shot well, sometimes that can be a distraction where it's no longer authentic. It's just not, doesn't seem as credible. And so make sure you are just learning those tips and tricks online about lighting and background and where you should sit, where you should look in the camera, how to edit photos, how to edit a reel, all of that. And then 6, plan. And so this, I learned this from being on the brand side, but we would create content usually 3 months in advance. And so that made our jobs a lot easier by planning, because we could do a lot of the work upfront. But then, of course, one of our content series always has to be a kind of real-time content. But because we had done all the planning with the other series, that it gave us time back in the moment where we could post on a whim and reschedule things if we needed to. But it's helpful to be consistent. You just really do need a plan. And so I have kind of my own content calendar I use around each of the series, so I know when I'm going to post. And that way I can also tie it to any holidays to be relevant. So are there any, for example, someone that helped the US general during the Civil War for the Union, he was the one that really was instrumental in creating Memorial Day in the United States. And his house is in a neighborhood in DC. And so last year I posted that story about Memorial Day, and hundreds of thousands of people shared it and viewed it, just because it was so grounded in DC, but it was so relevant and timely because I posted it, of course, on Memorial Day. And then 7, launch and test. And so all the platforms, this is why I think tracking each post that you do is really helpful. And likes are usually, it's kind of like follower count. It could be a vanity value. But so really look at how people are engaging. And so I like to look at the saves and the shares, but then also robust comments too. So not like an emoji, but an actual like 1 or 2 sentence from a real person that is more thoughtful, because that shows that that's high real estate for people to leave on social media, which means your content got them in some way to actually take the time to leave more than just an emoji in the comment. And so really kind of launch your content series, and after a few months, see what's working and what's not. And based on higher engagement, how can you optimize and make better the top engaging content series? And then anything that is kind of lower, try to either reimagine or just kill entirely and introduce a new content stream, which maps back to optimize, pivot, or retire. So using those principles and kind of the content that I do and how I like to run my social media presence, especially on Instagram, here's kind of how I have seen it for myself. And so knowing your why, for me, that's creating content that sparks curiosity. Researching others. And so I saw in researching a lot of other content creators in DC, and we all know each other, which is nice, and we're all friends. But a lot of people will post the same type of content. And so, for example, in the content creation world, oftentimes people will just go to the same PR, like whoever is pitching, they'll go. So they go to the restaurants that have a bigger marketing budget because they're owned by a group of restaurants, and everyone will go to the preview and just post the same thing. And so how can you create series that are just different from that? And so for me, I wanted to go to places that were more obscure. where even locals will ask, like, oh, like, where is this? I've actually never heard of this, and I grew up in DC. And so here's another example of this picture of it's just south of the National Mall. It's the central heating plant, but it is just a fascinating like place with beautiful rooftop views of the city because a lot of the monuments you feel like you can touch from this rooftop. And it does have the biggest electricity and water bill in Washington, D.C. And so this reel got also hundreds of thousands of views, um, just because it was more obscure and no one else was posting about it. Create a unique brand. Again, I use lowercase text and no to very limited self shots as well. Learn skills. I wanted to focus on unique clips. And so, how could I use my skill set as a photographer? And even when I'm shooting for video, how do I create just more interesting visuals? So, again, in this example, I like the contrast of the pipe from the central heating plant right next to this very polished Washington monument that a lot of people just recognize, even if they don't live in DC. And then my plan was to post at least one obscure spot every single week and just do that for the first few months and just see how people, one, does it spark joy for me, but also do people find it shareable and interesting? And then launched it and test. So again, I tracked the shares, the saves, the comments. And then because the series was doing so well, the Obscure DC series, I decided to increase the frequency and then enlarge the partners that I worked with. And so I'm a contributor for a website called Atlas Obscura that essentially I one post a lot on their website about places that I find in all these neighborhoods, but most of the obscure spots I highlight happen to be in the Atlas. And so I've built a relationship with their social media team where I'll create these reels that I'm posting anyways, and I'll invite them to be a collaborator. And they have a lot more followers than I do on Instagram. And so every time that I post, they will set the collaboration. The video gets way more views and I get a lot more followers. And then some of my followers follow them in return. And then finally, how I stay organized. And so this system, everyone will have a different system based on just how you're wired. But for me, I have one master Google document that I actually kind of leave it up on my screen all the time, where for me, it helps me plan. And so here you can kind of see some of the posts that I'm going to post already. And so because being a journalist, I also take the ethics online very seriously. And so anytime a restaurant pays for my meal because they want me to go, one, I'll only go if I've already been there on my own and it's good. I'm a big foodie in DC. And but I always like note on this calendar if it's comped, if it's a collaboration, and what it is, if it's a carousel or reel. And so I map it all out so that I can plan my day to go shoot it. And then I'm not stressed out, being like, oh, I don't know what to post. Because that's where often people will get stuck, where they don't know what to post. And so they just won't. And then they won't again and again and the next day and the next day. And you really do need to post consistently. And so I'll kind of fill it in as I go. And I usually take Sundays off. And so I won't post then. And so I post 6 pieces of content, usually always in the morning. And this is the calendar which I do. And then I have different other content series too. And so I'll kind of like put it all out. And anytime someone gives me a suggestion or have a random thought while I'm riding the metro, I will drop it into this master Google Doc. And then I also have a list of all the places I want to visit, how long it might take to get there, how many hours I need, all of that. So it's one master Google Doc it's a brain dump of everything, just so that it's a lot easier to create a reel. And now because of the planning, I have it in a rhythm where this morning, for example, I went to a preview of it's called the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum, which was approved by Congress in 2020. And they have a site picked out on the National Mall, but Congress needs to officially approve that site, and they just keep on just ignoring the vote on it. And but once they do that, it will be one of the newest museums in DC, celebrating women's contributions to U.S. history and culture. But they have a new exhibit that's kind of hidden in all the major monuments on the mall. And so because I have this rhythm, I knew it was coming up. I knew to save time. And it literally took me 20 minutes to create a reel that I'll post tomorrow about this exhibit, just because I've learned the skills to edit. And because of the planning, I just have a rhythm now where it just gets shorter over time. So now that was a lot. And I would love to take any questions, either about content, social media, anything.